In the United States, the right of freedom of speech is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. The Founding Fathers mandated that Congress shall make no law inhibiting freedom of speech, religion, assembly or the press. But the right to free speech can often lead to unwanted provocations, and in the past few months, two high-profile cases have caused some in America to ask if freedoms need to be curtailed. North America correspondent Michael Brissenden reports.
Sir, what can you tell us about what you talked about?
Still planning to go ahead with his plans for Saturday.
Even here, in the place that labels itself the land of the free, freedom can be uncomfortable, and the limits of that freedom certainly don't go unchallenged.
And the Quran was found guilty. Thus we are obligated to fulfill this punishment.
This is the latest confronting test of America's First Amendment rights.
If we are ready, then go ahead.
The mock trial and subsequent sentence of burning of the Quran, conducted by a publicity-seeking pastor with a tiny following, caused shock around the Muslim world and led to a series of protests in Afghanistan that in turn caused the death of 20 people, including 7 UN employees.
We don't feel responsible. In those countries, they do not have religious freedom. They do not have freedom of speech. They do not have freedom of religion. You cannot move there freely as a Christian and minority.
The government is not supposed to tell you what it is you're supposed to talk about or not talk about, or even compel you to speak about something you don't want to talk about.
For legal scholars like Robert Destro, the First Amendment is a source of constant debate. Like most Americans, he abhors the pastor's actions, but he, for one, defends his right to act.
This would be like Muslims defiling a crucifix, and Christians would get really upset about it, and they, as well they ought to be, because there ought to be a sensibility about the way other people believe. But the question: should the government put you in jail for insulting someone else's sensibility about their religions? There'd be a lot of people in jail.
More than any other law, the First Amendment has come to symbolise the American ideal of personal liberty and freedom. Even so, television networks here have decided they won't broadcast the burning of the Quran. And in the last few days, even some politicians have suggested that in this case, at this time, some limits should apply.
Free speech is a great idea, but we're in a war. During World War II, you had limits on what you could say if it would inspire the enemy.
But the politicians are not the ones who set the limits or determine if they've been met. It's the Supreme Court.
But it will have more historical impact in the next 2 decades than any other First Amendment decision.
Sean Summers is a small-town lawyer in Pennsylvania, but he's become a significant part of American legal history. It's only every 10 or 20 years that a challenge to the First Amendment ever gets as far as the Supreme Court. Sean Summers led the most recent of those cases, representing Al Snyder, the father of a dead soldier.
The reason we want to have free speech is so we can have an open dialogue, open discourse on different ideals. You may have an ideal, I may have an ideal, and hopefully the winner at the end of the day will advocate his or her position. At someone else's private funeral, no one has any business in advocating whatever position that you may or may not have.
Hating God, cowards' hearts, Ziploc bags for body parts.
Even in a country that has more than its fair share of fringe religious groups, the Westboro Church stands out.
If you have any thoughts about your never-dying soul, put away your idols, your false gods, and your filthy manner of life, and obey your God.
The Westboro Baptist Church is mostly made up of one large family led by Fred Phelps. The church believes Barack Obama is the Antichrist and has drawn national attention to its anti-gay crusade by picketing funerals of celebrities and dead soldiers. Most of the funerals, like that of Al Snyder's son Matt, have nothing to do with homosexual rights. But then that's not the point.
I'm sorry that they raised their son for the devil in hell. I'm sorry that they let him have anything to do with the army.
If you follow the Phelps logic, if it can be called logic, they're opposed to homosexuals, and in particular homosexuals in the military. Well, Al Snyder had nothing whatsoever to do with that. So essentially what they're doing is they're stealing someone else's private event so they can command an audience.
The Snyder family's challenge, went all the way to the Supreme Court. But the members of the Westboro Church are well versed on their First Amendment rights, and the court ruled in their favour.
The Supreme Court obviously has the final say in the decision, so that's the decision that we're stuck with at this point in time. But to sum it up, we're certainly disappointed in the outcome. I mean, Mr. Snyder was a private person. He wasn't a public figure. The law historically has made a distinction between public and private figures.
But as legal scholars like Robert Destro see it, the law doesn't make the actions right, and politicians and public figures should be more willing to condemn what is legally right, but still perhaps morally questionable.
These people are being unspeakably cruel, and I would wish that our government officials, rather than sitting behind the First Amendment and saying we can't say anything, to stand up and call things by their proper name. These people are not being good citizens.
But they have a right to do it still.
They have a right to do it, and I think our government officials have a right to condemn them, but not put them in jail.
Michael Brissenden with that report.